You're listening to the British Grand Prix podcast on Formula1 FanCast. To keep up to date with the latest Formula 1 news, visit www.formula1fancast.com, and you can also follow us on Twitter at Formula1 FanCast.
Well, the British Grand Prix served up a thrilling race with drama from start to finish. Fernando Alonso took his and Ferrari's first win of the season. The Red Bulls' Sebastian Vettel and Mark Webber came home in second and third. Lewis Hamilton just about held off Felipe Massa for fourth. Jenson was forced to retire, and Force India's Paul Di Resta finished 15th. And I'm pleased to be joined once again by Will Vincent. How are you, Will?
Good morning-ish. I'm alright, how are you?
Good afternoon, you should say.
Good afternoon. I'm alright, how are you?
I'm not too bad. Not a bad Grand Prix.
Yeah, it's really exciting actually. I mean, everything from, Silverstone's always produced great racing, all the way to the fact, the new wing, the new layout, the rain, the not so rainy bits. Yeah, it was really good.
Well, before we do go on to talk about the race, the row about the exhaust and diffusers came about throughout the weekend. Just before practice on Saturday, the FIA reversed a rule change that was introduced on Friday following pressure from Red Bull. A statement then released by the FIA on Saturday said that the rules would revert to what they'd been at the European Grand Prix 2 weeks ago. And on Sunday, the Formula 1 teams agreed to compromise a deal to end the technical row that had split the sport. Will, making decisions at the last minute, and especially during the Grand Prix weekend as well. It's not on, is it?
Well, not really, no. I mean, I think the last time we had such a big debate over whether you could or couldn't change something on the weekend was Indianapolis 2005 with the Michelin tyres. And obviously remember what happened then when they said no changes whatsoever. And I think a lot of teams, Ferrari especially, you could tell they'd set their car up and brought new things to the track, knowing that the ban was going to come into force. And now reversing it is not only gotten rid of a lot of their hard work, but also poses the question, well, who makes the rules? Is it the FIA or is it, the ones with the money, Red Bull, McLaren, all that?
Well, the fans, I'm sure yourself and many others will be asking, why can't the rules be kept simple?
Well, yeah, the thing is, they try to keep the rules as simple as they can, but then, as you see, every year in Australia, someone comes up with a new idea, a new way of finding a grey area in the rules and exploiting that to find themselves an extra couple of attempts, and then all the other teams then play catch-up. I think the issue just becomes when the big teams just use that to their advantage, because they can do a lot more development, a lot more time in the wind tunnel, and it just, over the course of the season, you just see the gap between the big teams and little teams increase all the time.
Well, coming on to the race, and the prancing horse of Ferrari and Fernando Alonso came out on top for the first time since career last year. Will, a superb drive from Alonso and a win Ferrari needed.
Well, yeah, about time to be honest when it comes to Ferrari. And I think with Alonso as well, he's been in contention to win a number of races this year. He did say that this was a make or break weekend for Ferrari in terms of championship, and to be fair, he did an amazing job and he showed why he is one of the best racers in Formula 1.
Well, Spanish still finds himself 90 plus points behind Vettel in the drivers' standings, but the result at Silverstone is certainly a cause of optimism for the Italian team, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I think Red Bull would have had it as an easy weekend anyway. They've always been strong at Silverstone, and the track doesn't test cars mechanically as much as some more tracks we've got coming up in the rest of the season. I think if Ferrari can close that gap and apply more pressure onto Red Bull, might see a few more issues. For example, they've had issues with KERS, with DRS all season. If Ferrari can push them even closer, I think a lot more of those issues and a lot more of those cracks in the Red Bull team will start showing.
Well, since Monaco, it's fair to say Ferrari have made considerable progress, and based on what we saw in Monaco and Valencia, I suppose it was only a matter of time before Ferrari got their first win of the season.
Well, yeah, that as well, is that Ferrari did start as the third fastest team back at the start of the year, and I think they've done a lot of work down at Maranello to close that gap and now be in a position where they are, so that they are now the second best team. I think if they have anything like the way they did at the end of last season, where Ferrari were the dominant factor, I think they very well could still yet pose a very late season threat.
Well, let's just mention Felipe Massa as well. He finished the race fifth. Massa was certainly involved in some great tussles with both Jenson and Lewis Hamilton.
Well, yeah, and we all know that the red cars and the silver and black cars, when they do get together, a lot of the times it either ends up with some amazing overtaking manoeuvres or one of them with a broken wing. But I think here, the overtaking we've seen at Silverstone's been exceptional. There's been some very clean passes and very good racing, and Massa showing that, he might not be the number one driver at Ferrari, but he's still got the heart.
Can you actually see him staying with the team, or do you think the Ferrari hierarchy are looking for a replacement?
Well, I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword here with Massa and Ferrari. On one end, they always want to have two very good drivers to, compete for, especially the Constructors' Championship. And if you have one guy who's miles ahead of the other, it's very difficult to get yourself into a position where you can win the Constructors' Championship, especially how dominant Red Bull is and how strong McLaren is as a cohesive unit. But I think also Massa is a good driver. I mean, he's probably a better teammate than Barrichello was when he was teammates with Schumacher all those years ago. And at the same time, do you really think Ferrari will get someone who's that fast and that good to annoy Alonso that much?
And let's not forget, Massa's actually made a decent start this year, hasn't he?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously last year he had all the issues, coming back and everything. And I think that he's done a very good job this season this year in a car which probably hasn't been set up for his liking. They probably put more emphasis on the way Fernando likes to drive the car. But I think that he's managed to adapt around it, and he's still done a really good job.
Well, the Red Bulls of Sebastian Vettel and Mark Webber finished second and third, and had Vettel not had his pit stop problem, German may well have gone to record his 7th win of the season.
Yeah. But I think Vettel did well. I mean, yeah, he did have his pit stop issues. Whether he would have won the race, I'm not too sure. But it would have been a terrific scrap at the end between him and Alonso had he not had that pit stop error. But instead, we got ourselves a really interesting battle between the two Red Bulls.
But after the race, even Vettel admitted that Alonso was just too good on the day.
Well, yeah. And I think that comes down to setup as well. Because I think the Ferrari people, they'll probably look at the skies a lot more. Red Bull probably wanted to set their car up so they could be on the front row. And I wouldn't have been too surprised if Ferrari set up their car for more changeable conditions.
Well, let's now go on to the team orders issue. Webber did look as if he'd get past his teammate, but the Australian was told by his team to keep a sensible gap between himself and Vettel in the closing stage of the race. Will, if you were Mark, how would you have been feeling after the race?
I wouldn't have listened to the team orders. I would have overtaken them full stop and then done what we had to do then. Simple as that, because I think team orders is still disgusting. I mean, I can understand the last race of the season if there is, the mathematical possibility of helping your teammate out, but at the end of the day, if we're going to have 24 drivers but you're not allowed to race with one each, then you might as well just have 12 drivers and they race half and half. Simple as that.
So if you're Christian Horner, you would have allowed both of them to race then?
Well, yeah, and I think Christian was one of those guys as well last year that kept on going on about the issue we had with Massa and Alonso down at Hockenheim. And I think, it's a bit hypocritical of himself. It doesn't do the team any good, it doesn't do the Red Bull name any good, and it's just showing more and more and more what Webber was saying last year, that he feels like a number 2 driver.
Well, after what happened in Turkey last year, do you think that played a part?
Slightly. And I think you could look at as well more recently about Hamilton and Button at Canada and what happens when teammates try and overtake each other. I mean, that might have played some form of a factor in it, but again, they're racers, and if it was any of the other people in that field, they would have been, go, push him. Wouldn't have cared about the car. And I think, if they're going to race that hard, let them race that hard.
So now this has happened, where do you see Webber's future lying?
I see Webber winning the next race in Germany, seeing as he always seems to do that. Whenever he gets reminded of the fact he's a number 2 driver, he always goes out and wins the race. But I'm not too sure. I mean, the issue is he's an old guy. He's not the youngest in the field. I mean, he's probably got, no more than 2-3 years left in his Formula 1 career anyway. I don't think he'll go anywhere apart from Red Bull, but I don't think he'll be in Formula 1 much longer. I think he'll hang up his helmet and possibly go elsewhere. Maybe V8 supercars, maybe to America. Who knows?
For McLaren, Lewis Hamilton finished the race 4th, and Jenson Button unfortunately was forced to retire. On Saturday, Button could only qualify 5th and Hamilton 10th, and yes, the weather was a key factor, but qualifying yet again proved to be McLaren's Achilles heel.
Well, yeah, and I think I said to you last week about Button, 2 weeks ago even about Button, that the one thing he needs to do is get his qualifying performances sorted out. I mean, you can make a good enough start from 3rd place on the grid, maybe even 4th, but as soon as you're back on that 3rd row, there's just too many cars in front of your way to make any form of a jump. And we all know how Vettel drives off into the distance in that first 2 laps. He's the master of doing so. But he still needs to work on that. And I think Hamilton was unlucky as well. I've said weather. I mean, I would almost suggest that if they have an issue like that in qualifying again, when it starts raining halfway through a session, they should revert to like a 2-3 lap qualifying format. Like they used to have the old, 12 laps you do an hour. They just have, okay, you guys have got 10 minutes, scrapping all the dry weather time, start again.
Well, things look good at Canada. Obviously, Button won the race, but things since then haven't exactly gone to plan.
It's been a difficult year for the guys at Woking. That's blatantly obvious for all to see. And I think they're one of those transition phases yet again. McLaren's biggest issue always seems to be the fact that they can do very well for 1 or 2 years, but because of the rate development going on around them, I think they're struggling to keep up with having to, design a new car, because they're probably looking towards 2012's car already. Design a new car, learn all the regulations for next year, and still put that amount of effort into producing a race-winning car. And I think as well, this comes down to the fact, they've got all these technical partnerships all over the place, all the way through, the Formula 1, the racing divisions, all the way through to the road cars on Top Gear on Sunday night. But I think they need to concentrate more on their Formula 1 team more than anything else.
So where has McLaren's race pace gone then?
I think what happened is it went out the back of the exhaust and wasn't allowed to do anything, simply put. Because, there's always been a talk about them having to find a way to catch up the Red Bulls, and I've got a feeling they did a lot of work trying to use that as one of the methods of catching up. The same way last year we saw everyone coming up with their own version of the F-Darks, a double lane, so on and so forth, just to catch up in that way. So I think they're trying to catch up with the regulations, and changing the regulations every 10 seconds is just going to make it even more difficult for them to find some raw race pace.
Well, it was always going to be difficult for Lewis Hamilton to win the race from 10th, but certainly did well to finish 4th, even though, unfortunately, from a British perspective, didn't finish 3rd.
Well, yeah, I'm sure the 100 and something thousand people at Silverstone would have loved to have seen at least one British guy on the podium, but he did a good job, and he's shown again as well that he's not going to change his driving style. He's just going to race how he's born to race. And I think the second he changed doing that is the second we lose Hamilton. And I think that today you prove that you've still got to have that aggressive edge. I always compare Hamilton and Button to Senna and Prost respectively, and how Hamilton was always a very fast driver, Button always a technical driver. And I think that if you were to change that around, it wouldn't work. Hamilton can't become more technical just because of the way he drives, the way he sets up his car to drive. Button, he's a master of making a set of tyres last forever. He's managing to hit all those apexes time after time. And if you try and ask Button to come too aggressive, he just won't be able to perform that way.
But no doubt Hamilton's heart will have sank when he was told to save fuel with more than 10 laps to go.
Well, yeah. This is what I don't get about Formula 1 at times. I think this is the first time that it's actually really become prevalent. Obviously there's no refuelling. I believe you get a 25 second... Well, you get a drive-through penalty, which leaves you about 25 seconds. But for them not to put enough fuel in, knowing that there'll be changeable conditions, is stupid. For example, they could have had an issue where they were having to red flag the race, as an example, and they've had to use more fuel than going to the grid, so on and so forth. But how they made that mistake is beyond me, and I think there should be better rule put in place towards refuelling, saying that they have to start the race with X number of kilograms worth of fuel in the car.
And for Jenson Button, had he not been forced to retire, he could have been on target to break his hoodoo of not finishing on the podium at his home Grand Prix. Yeah,
disappointing for Button, but again, it's the curse of the Silverstone track for him yet again. And I think, it will happen one day. It took Damon forever to try and win the British Grand Prix, same with a lot of British drivers. But it will happen for him. It's just one of those things that I think the more you think about not being able to perform at a particular track, the more you don't perform at a particular track.
But worryingly for McLaren, it's been Ferrari who have been the team challenging Red Bull.
Well, as I said, let's not forget as well, it's that certain tracks suit Ferrari, certain tracks suit Red Bull, certain tracks suit McLaren. The team that ultimately does best is the ones that can adapt the most to the wide range variety of tracks on the calendar. I think over the course of the season, I think Ferrari are a better team at the minute, but that's not necessarily because they have a better car. It's because I think they've just managed to adapt to their issues better than McLaren have.